Hello everyone. Today we're diving into another 4 unsolved cases of missing young men from across Canada. From one who vanished right before a big move across the country, to another whose work received a strange call that he was sick and couldn't come in, to 2 others who vanished from their home in the middle of the night and were never seen again. As I said, all 4 are still unsolved, and all of these cases need answers. 24-year-old Rene Bernard Laflamme, who friends called Barney, had big plans to move across the country to start his life as a young adult. Rene's family home was located in Ottawa, Ontario, though he'd been living in Montreal, Quebec at the time, renting an apartment in the Little Italy neighborhood. There he lived with his landlord for a period of time before renting an apartment next door. In the spring of 1981, Rene had plans to move across the country to Vancouver, where his girlfriend was living at the time and whom he planned to meet up with there. From his family home in Ottawa, he was heading to Montreal for one last weekend, mainly to pick up a welfare check so that he could secure the money to travel out west. The plan was to spend the weekend in Montreal and then return home to his family home to collect his belongings. He had also made arrangements for a friend to pick him up in Ottawa on Monday following the weekend. The two then planned to travel to Vancouver together. Rene was last seen in Montreal, Quebec on May 29th of 1981, but was expected to return back to Ottawa on the 31st. However, when he didn't return by that date, his family pretty immediately knew something was off. No matter what kind of situation that he would get into, it was not like Rene to not at least even call home to give them an update. Despite traveling around quite frequently, Rene was said to be extremely close to this family. They insisted that he would not just disappear without a trace, especially knowing the pain that it would cause his mother Joan. Being one of 6 siblings, Rene was described as a happy-go-lucky type of guy who was always fiercely protective of his sisters. Given what was described as his transient nature and how often he was on the move, they were never exactly sure what Rene was involved in, but suspected it wasn't always good. They knew he could also be temperamental when drinking, and had been entangled with the law on more than one occasion. One of the identifiers in his missing persons file is a scar from a stab wound on his leg. Rene's siblings have also questioned his relationship with his landlord in Montreal, saying that they never truly grasped the nature of the relationship that their brother had with the man. And they also questioned if it was more intimate than Rene had ever let on. And it was very strange the way that the relationship was described. It was described as if the man seen Rene as a son to him, but he was also very controlling and jealous towards Rene. They also detailed having overheard a heated phone argument between the two in the days before Rene disappeared, allegedly bickering over Rene owing money. When the family confronted the landlord after Rene's disappearance, they say he appeared calm and detached. He told them that he had driven Rene to a nightclub that weekend, and apparently that was the last time he had saw him. The landlord also handed over a pillowcase with a few of Rene's belongings inside, including an address book, a set of keys to his mother's house, and a recent picture of Rene taken in a photo booth. Rene's sister Darlene saying, quote, "He was very angry with my brother, and he was the last one with my brother. I said, 'Why have you got my mother's keys?' And he said, 'Barney left them with me.'" End quote. Which is a very strange thing to have the house keys to a missing man. I guess if he was going to a club, maybe they were safer back at home, but it definitely strikes you as odd. If he was, going to be returning home, he would have needed his keys. And he'd also think that the landlord, who he seemed to be quite close with, would also have found it strange if he didn't return back home after the nightclub and then didn't ever return to come get his keys to go back home. Where else would he have gone then? But the strange circumstances didn't end there. Shortly before his disappearance, Rene had brought his sister Darlene to a party. Except once there, he introduced her to everyone under a different name and told everyone that she was his friend, not his sister. Finding this very odd, after the party, Darlene confronted Rene about why he was doing that, and he ended up telling her that he didn't want those individuals to know who she was to him. Then, before returning to Montreal for that last weekend, Rene surprised his family by deciding to perm his hair. It was something he had never done before, and it altered his appearance to the point that his sisters later wondered whether he didn't want to be recognized. Darlene believes that her brother didn't want to get the family involved in whatever he was involved in. The big question being, was he hiding from somebody? To this day, the family believes that confusion over which police force had jurisdiction over his case cost them crucial time early on. The family had first approached the Ottawa police, however, they were told that they actually had to go and report him missing to the Montreal police, since that was the place he was allegedly last seen. The Montreal police, however, maintained that the Ottawa police should lead the investigation. And of course, they all believed that since Rene was an adult, if he wanted to be missing, he could be. Essentially just a mess with nobody wanting to investigate his disappearance. And as we know, when somebody goes missing, the early hours and days of their disappearance are the most crucial time. Eventually, acting on a request from the Ottawa police, Montreal police would visit the last known address that Rene was known to live, but all they did was confirm that he wasn't home. The family was told that police also did not question the landlord, which is something that always did not sit right with them. In September of 1982, Rene's family would learn that his information still hadn't been entered into the country's national database for missing persons, despite it being more than a year since his disappearance. And they learned this information after writing a letter to the Solicitor General of Canada at the time. A year and a half after his disappearance, the Montreal police followed up on one last detail with the family. Rene's mother wanted to know if that welfare check that he had traveled to the city to collect had ever been cashed. In a typed response, police said they were unable to track down the check through the city's welfare service. However, it had been returned to the office under a slightly different name, Rene Laflamme instead of Laflamme, with a note that only said, "Déménagé," moved. After this, police decided to close Rene's case due to lack of evidence. They essentially felt like they had nothing to prove that he was actually a missing person, even though no one had ever seen him again after that weekend. Even though he never even got his check, which you'd think he would have needed that money, which was the whole reason he went there. So how was he just going to disappear with no money? Joan would pass away in 1995 without ever knowing what happened to her firstborn son. She's said to be buried behind a church in a lot that's meant for two, with a second place reserved for Rene. His sisters have described the weight of living with his disappearance as a confusing series of ups and downs. He's never forgotten, and they want answers. In the mid-2000s, a woman named Sophie Wheeler, who married Rene's nephew, would take interest in his case and began to make sure that his information was listed on different missing persons pages online. She also contacted the coroner's offices across the country, inquiring about unidentified remains that fit his description in the timeline. And surprisingly, despite decades ago police claiming his case was considered closed, it still does remain open. In 2013, various steps were said to have taken place to locate Rene. In 2014, officers met with family members to obtain DNA samples. What happened to Rene that weekend when he returned to Montreal? Was there foul play involved here? Or could the series of events leading up to his disappearance mean something else? Could Rene have been involved in more than anyone ever knew? And is that why he permed his hair? Is that why he was introducing his sister to individuals that he knew as someone that wasn't his sister because he was scared they would hurt her? But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what Rene may have been involved in. What matters is that his family needs answers and Rene needs justice. So let's take one more good look at Rene in case it may spark a memory in you. Or maybe he possibly is still out there somewhere and you may recognize him. Rene is described as a white male standing 5'7" tall, weighing around 150 pounds with black, shoulder-length hair that was permed at the time, and he had brown eyes. He also has a scar on his right leg. His birthday is April 12th of 1957, and he went by the nickname Barney. 19-year-old Troy Cook was born July 16th of 1978 to his father, Tom Cook. Troy was described as being like a magnet. He drew people to him. He was always surrounded by people. Those who knew him said that if you had 5 minutes with him, you'd want another 15. He was a considerate and friendly young man. Troy grew up with his family in Truro, Nova Scotia, a town in central Nova Scotia, Canada. He had recently decided to get his own apartment in town at approximately 1 Victoria Street. He worked at a grocery store and had an active social life. It's also noted that he'd often bring girlfriends home and frequented a local bar called Chevy's. His father, Tom, saying, quote, "I said, no problem. I'll help you set up an apartment." He was 19, and he just wanted to spread his wings. You know, he had a good social life. End quote. Despite moving out on his own, Troy was still frequently coming home to have meals and do his laundry. His father would also often leave care packages for him at his home. After Troy spent a night at his family home in Kemptown, around 10 a.m. on Thursday, June 11th of 1998, Tom would drop his son off at his apartment in Truro, although he never saw the driveway or if Troy went through the door. He then left, heading to an appointment at the garage. Half an hour later at 10:30 a.m., his boss at the Atlantic Superstore received a call from someone claiming to be Troy, saying he wouldn't be able to work his shift that evening. The employee that answered thought it was Troy, but could not say with absolute certainty, noting that he sounded sick and strange. What's also interesting is that this phone call was placed from a payphone by the Tim Hortons on Pictou Road and Wright Avenue in Bible Hill, which would have been around 4 to 5 kilometers away from Troy's apartment. No security cameras in the area captured this call being placed. But this was the last time that anyone heard from Troy again. There have been no confirmed sightings since. And on top of that, we don't even know for sure if it was Troy that placed that phone call. The following day was a Friday, and Tom had plans to meet with his son at a restaurant. When Troy didn't show up to the restaurant, however, the family would end up calling the Atlantic Superstore, and that's when they learned that he also hadn't gone into work. When they went and checked his apartment and couldn't find him there either, that's when they called the RCMP, but then they were directed to the Truro Police Services. What's so odd about this case is that when Tom dropped Troy off at his apartment, he claims that he seemed perfectly fine. But then half an hour later, he was allegedly calling into work sick. He had also, again, seemed fine during their family time and had not mentioned going out anywhere afterwards. When Troy's apartment was looked into, the only thing missing from it seemed to be his driver's license. However, he didn't have access to his car at the time because it was broken down at the family home. From all accounts, Troy was a good young man who never caused his family any trouble and had only been living in his apartment for a month before his disappearance. What also didn't make sense is that if Troy had walked to the spot of the payphone, it would have taken him over an hour, meaning that he either had to get driven there by someone or it wasn't Troy placing that phone call. And if it wasn't him who made the call, it had to be placed by someone who knew his routine, because who else would know that he had a shift to go into, that he needed to be called out for, or else it would raise alarms? How many people would have known that information? Tom also insisted that Troy only smoked a little weed, he didn't do any hard drugs, and that if he had gotten into any trouble with anything, he would have came to his family about it. Troy's case is part of the $150,000 reward program offered in Nova Scotia to solve these missing persons cases. We've spoken about many of these cases before, but it has been decades, and Troy is still not found, and his family still does not have answers. His father, Tom, has spent the last few decades fighting to bring his son home. So let's take one more good look at Troy. Troy is described as having brown eyes, standing 5'6" tall, and at the time of his disappearance, he was only 19 years old, weighing around 120 pounds, and had black hair. 23-year-old Yoseph Birhanu was born August 4th of 1994 and was living in Kitchener, Ontario, a major city located 60 kilometers northwest of Hamilton. Yoseph is described as a quiet and sensitive man. He's known to be generally pretty quiet, but worried a lot and was a little terrified sometimes, but according to family, as far as they knew, he wasn't depressed. On November 23rd of 2017, Yoseph was at the family home in Kitchener with his sister Yolem, while their parents were working their usual night shifts. Without anyone knowing, he would end up walking out of their home around 11 p.m. The following day, on November 24th, he would place a phone call from a payphone in Union Station in Toronto to a family member in North York. During the call, he said he was coming to visit their home, however, he never arrived. Despite saying he was going to visit them, there are no records to this date of him traveling anywhere, and he also wasn't carrying a cell phone. The only personal items missing were his backpack and 2 passports. And the Toronto police themselves have said it's as if he vanished into thin air. They've checked local hospitals and shelters with no luck, and have not seen any activity on his bank account since he disappeared. His sister Yolem saying, quote, "In the past, he'd gone away for a couple of days without telling anyone, but he's never done anything like this. It's really hard to understand. We just don't have any clues as to what would have happened or where to look at this point." End quote. Yoseph's case is so confusing because just like the Toronto police said, he was there one moment and essentially gone the next. What happened to Yoseph after placing that phone call at Union Station? And why did he call those individuals claiming he was going to see them and then not go there? The big problem is, from Union Station, you could essentially go anywhere from there. Is it possible that he paid with cash and then got on some sort of public transportation that took him somewhere else? I think it is possible. But what's strange is that police seem to not have any documentation of him traveling. It really makes me wonder, did they check the security cameras? Because there are cameras literally everywhere at Union Station and on all of the buses, subways, everything. Or was there a period of time where they didn't check them and the footage was overwritten? Maybe that footage was lost and it could have gave them answers. Because you'd think if they did have that footage, they would say, yeah, he made the phone call, here he is making the phone call, and then he went this direction. But we don't have that. What we do know is that it has been 8 years and his family still doesn't have answers as to what happened to him. So let's take one more good look at Yoseph. Yoseph is described as an Ethiopian Jewish man standing 5'8" tall, weighing around 150 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. He has a history of mental health issues, although no exact diagnosis is given. He could possibly be carrying a black Swiss point backpack and wearing tan Timberlands size 8 or 9. He also has a Canadian and an Israeli passport. 22-year-old Kelvin Philip Norris was born August 2nd of 1964 to his mother Gail and was living in Bath, Ontario, a community along Lake Ontario west of Kingston. On November 22nd of 1984, Kelvin was last seen approximately at 11 p.m., walking on Highway 33 west of the village. Though there is not much information on Kelvin's disappearance, it's noted that police did search the property surrounding his home with dogs. It's also noted that Kelvin had a severe speech impediment, but that he also may have had undiagnosed schizophrenia. Following his disappearance, Gail would place ads in local newspapers, hoping to spread the word of her son's disappearance. She spoke about how the family had become very anxious to know about Kelvin's whereabouts and to appeal for anyone with information to contact the OPP. Despite this, decades would pass with no answers. And to this day, we truly don't have much information on Kelvin's disappearance. We just know he was last spotted walking away from the village. After that, we don't have anything else. Kelvin is described as a white male, standing 5 foot 10 inches tall, weighing around 150 pounds, with long brown hair and brown eyes. He had a speech impediment, as well as a 3-inch scar on his right hand. He's thought to have last been seen wearing a 3/4 length gray tweed duffel coat, blue sweatshirt with a hood, jeans, and brown leather boots. This is an age progression sketch of how Kelvin may look in his 40s. Let's take one more good look at Rene, Troy, Yoseph, and Kelvin. If you have any information about these young men's disappearances, please contact the local authorities. I'll have the information in the description below. There are 4 families here who have no answers decades later. So please share out this video. Please share out any information on their cases, missing persons flyers, anything that you can. And let's hope that word can get spread far enough that it gets to the people with answers. If you have any other cases you want me to cover, leave a comment down below and I'll add them to my list. My heart goes out to these families. I truly hope answers come soon. And as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.